Truth is making a comeback. America's Top Stories with Lisa K. Donner.
U.S. Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy steps down, immigration reform, and incivility in politics. All ahead on this edition of Truth is Making a Comeback, America's Top Stories. After 3 decades on the U.S. Supreme Court, the crucial swing vote, Anthony Kennedy has resigned. This paves the way for President Trump to nominate a strict constructionist to the highest court in the land. Kennedy has long been known for his soft approach on social issues, and it's often been said, as Kennedy goes, so goes the court. Kennedy stepping down from the court may send shivers up the spines of those on the left as the president chooses a new nominee from his list of 25 possible justices. Joining us today is someone who follows the U.S. Supreme Court very closely, constitutional lawyer and Liberty Nation legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza. Scott, what say you about Kennedy's resignation?
Lisa, I think that for the last go-round for his pick with Justice Gorsuch, Donald Trump seemed to rely heavily on the Federalist Society for law and public policy, and that organization is a long-standing conservative and libertarian legal group designed to foster those values in judges and senior lawyers. And so if he goes back to his list, which I'm sure he reached in working with the Federalist Society, we may see another strict constructionist nominated. Certainly, I hope that to be the case as a small government advocate, but we won't know until we see them. And it's always important to bear in mind that while the people who do the nominating try their best to nominate someone who will reflect their own values, they are sometimes frustrated once those nominees take their positions on the court. So what you think you may get may not be what you do get, but we're just going to have to wait and see.
What do you make of Anthony Kennedy's tenure? In other words, what is Kennedy's legacy?
Well, I think that we refer to Anthony Kennedy as a swing vote on the court, and to me, that is his legacy. His legacy is deciding for many Americans these issues that if he went the other way on, they would be decided differently. We can talk about the gay marriage case. We can talk about Citizens United. I think he wrote the majority opinions for the court in all of the homosexual privacy and gay marriage cases. So that's probably where his biggest impact lies. And going forward, his biggest impact on American life, I think, is probably there.
All right, Scott, now stay right where you are. We are going to come back to you on Truth is Making a Comeback, America's Top Stories, in just a moment. The U.S. Supreme Court has been doling out opinions like Halloween candy these last few weeks. And here's a classic case of why Justice Kennedy's resignation is so significant. In a 5-4 decision with Kennedy again as the swing vote, the Supreme Court ruled on President Trump's travel ban. The High Court said that the lower court injunction from Hawaii, essentially halting the travel ban, was improper and struck it down. Scott joins us again for more on this.
Now, the thing is, the Supreme Court, or 5 Supreme Court justices in any case, have already said that they believe that it's unlikely that they would lose, and that was the standard they had to meet for the injunction. So 5 Supreme Court justices have already said if this were to be examined by a competent court, it's unlikely that they would win. Well, that's a pretty good odds that that's how they're going to vote if they're actually voting on the merits of the law itself rather than the injunctive relief granted in order to stop that law's implementation, which is what, in fact, they did rule on today.
There has been incessant talk about immigration, but little in terms of real progress on this thorny and divisive issue. The House bill, as expected, was defeated this week by a margin of 121 to 301. This was a GOP compromise bill that included a $25 billion appropriation for building a border wall. Still, immigration is one of the most bitter political hot potatoes in the swamp this summer. Lest we be accused of bias, we've turned to an immigrant to get the latest. Liberty Nation's chief political correspondent, Graham J. Noble. So, Graham, bring us up to date on the immigration situation.
Yes, that's right, Lisa. I am a legal immigrant, in case you're wondering. Um, it's a little messy. Really, the Republicans always somehow seem to make a bit of a dog's dinner, shall we say, about immigration reform. And that's because they don't seem to be able to make up their mind what they really want or what they don't want. Even on the conservative wing of the party, it appears that they're not entirely sure what they want. And of course, Trump has said variously that either he will sign any bill that lands on his desk, or let's not even bother to do this because no bill is going to get through the Senate anyway. So from a Republican point of view, it's all a bit messy.
All right, so my question is, how can the Democrats get away with basically doing nothing about the Dreamer and DACA?
Well, I think, as a lot of us obviously strongly suspect, the Democrats don't actually want a fix for this issue at all. The only thing that the Democrats are really going to accept when it comes to immigration is what they call a clean DACA bill. In other words, basically a piece of legislation that simply gives the Dreamers a pathway to permanent legal status in this country, and doesn't do anything else apart from that. Or, of course, the only other thing they're going to accept is basically, let's get rid of pretty much all of our immigration laws and have a virtually open border. Beyond, they're not going to support anything else. They're not going to support anything that involves funding for a wall. They're not going to support an end to chain migration. These are the kind of things that the president wants. They would, as many people have said before, and as I've said before often to people, they would rather have this as an issue to campaign on than actually something that we can resolve and move on from.
Glad to hear that you're here legally. Thanks, Graham.
Okay, thank you.
This week, the final growth figures for the first quarter of 2018 were released. President Trump has long said he would heal our sluggish economy. So how's he really doing on that score? Joining us from Toronto is Liberty Nation's economic correspondent Andrew Moran with the latest.
Well, anyone who sees the economy, anyone who just looks around, you see the economy is booming. From the data I've recently seen, the Federal Reserve's M2 money supply is still expanding, so that's going to help continue rev the U.S. economy for at least another year, maybe 2 years. And then when the money supply contracts, if it ever does, then you're going to see perhaps the economy slow down a bit. Trade inevitably will play a role in the U.S. economy, but monetary policy typically plays a much larger role, whether it's raising interest rates or unwinding the Fed's balance sheet or the printing of the money. But overall, for the average voter, Trump still has a lot of political capital from the economy. So I think the Republicans do have a shot when it comes to midterm elections. I'm not sure where I saw it recently, but the last poll I saw, I think it was on Liberty Nation, they were talking about how the blue wave is pretty much non-existent. And also, considering the political climate we are in now, it's hard to believe that economics will play a role at all. I know the old phrase, it's the economy stupid, but the way the Democrats have been behaving, Maxine Waters wants to attack Trump supporters, and you have restaurants kicking out Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and you have Donnie Deutsch calling Trump voters Nazis. Trump could shut down the whole border and not allow any goods, and I think his base would still be solid, just because they can't stand the elite attacking them personally and equating Trump supporters to Nazism or fascism. So the left is really digging hole into itself, because I'm pretty sure people are having somewhat of perhaps Trump fatigue, just because the way the media is constantly on his tail, and they're attacking him like they've never attacked any of the president before. It's worse than when they did it after Bush, and of course they were completely silent with Obama. So will the economy have a deal in the midterm elections? Maybe in some of the poorer states, the middle America states. Overall, you'll see more of those the quarrels, the everyday quarrels, have an effect than economics.
Is there anyone out there in TV land who remembers George Washington's rules of civility? Well, it seems like there should be a run on those little treasures on Amazon. So far, we've had a Republican congressman gunned down on a baseball field, the press secretary kicked out of a restaurant, and oh, so much more. And we can't forget Mad Maxine, a California Democrat who called on her supporters to, quote, create a crowd and push back on members of President Donald Trump's administration in public. Joining us to discuss a lack of political civility is Liberty Nation's national correspondent Sarah Cowgill. Sarah, it seems like a schoolyard game of who started it first. What do you have to say about this?
There's no civility in politics anymore. With the Representative Maxine Waters at her own rally, calling for a push back against Trump supporters, Trump cabinet members, and Trump staffers, basically inciting violence, to the Red Hen restaurant in Virginia that pushed Sarah Sanders and her family out and continued to follow them and harass them down the street. There is no civility. It's gone. Somebody needs to either tamp it down and stop this silliness or take action.
And now for my parting shot of the week. The Political Ghetto is alive and well with our illustrious friends over at the Daily Beast. Stereo Williams, who penned an article entitled The Conservative War on Hip Hop, White Scapegoating and Black Respectability, quoted one of my recent articles on LibertyNation.com defending jazz legend Wynton Marsalis. Marsalis, you may remember, took a lot of heat for saying hip-hop has done a lot more to damage race relations in the United States than a statue of Robert E. Lee. But when Mr. Williams over at The Beast quoted me, he added a strange quota to my quote, saying, said Lisa Donner, who is white. Will someone please tell me where Stereo Williams was when Martin Luther King Jr. envisioned a world where people would be judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin? Would my quote about Mr. Marsalis have been taken in a different light if my author picture revealed a different skin color? What about our black correspondent who writes from a conservative perspective? What about my Lebanese heritage? Do I still count as white or am I taupe? Certainly this information should go into Mr. Williams' colorful cauldron that he is stirring over at The Beast. But skin color wasn't the only fault Stereo Williams found in those who support Wynton Marsalis' comments about hip-hop and the black culture. There is yet another accusation he felt the need to level against Whitey. Quote, there has always been an uneasy, often exploitive relationship between black creativity and white consumption. My father, who was not black but 100% Lebanese, was a jazz drummer. My earliest memories are sitting on a stool in some jazz club, sipping a Shirley Temple and listening to Billy, Ella, and the Count. Then there were the many nights with my parents jamming to jazz in our basement with their black friends till 3 a.m. To extrapolate on Mr. Williams' point, this means I grew up exploiting black creativity. And all this time, I thought I was just enjoying the greatest music on the planet Earth. Perhaps Stereo Williams should consider giving his racist pen a rest and think about the things that matter most. When you judge a person's comment by the color of their skin, you are missing the essence of Dr. King's message. So there you have it from a white person, as the Beast would call me, or maybe it should be taupe. And that's my parting shot. Join us again next week for Truth is Making a Comeback, America's Top Stories. I'm Lisa K. Donner. Thanks so much for joining us.
Click like and subscribe and visit LibertyNation.com today.